All right. Good morning. Welcome to the East Bay Regional Park District Board Finance Committee for October 22nd, 2021. Pursuant to the Park District Resolution 2021-9277 and the Brown Act as amended, we will be having our meeting in a virtual setting, and people who are interested in publicly talking to us, since we had no public comment requests beforehand, either by voicemail or phone, you should, if you want to comment, please contact Caitlin Stone at cstone@ebparks.org, or you may call her at 510-544-2400. So let's begin by having roll call of the directors who are here. Caitlin?
Thank you so much, Director Lane. All right, I would love to start with Director Corbett.
Here.
Thank you. And Director Eccles.
Here.
Thank you again. And last but certainly not least, Director Lane.
I am here too.
Thank you.
Thank you. And all right, and with that, we have a number of staff here. I wonder if AGM Ocker would introduce some of them, and then others will be speaking later at the meeting.
Thank you, Director Lane. I'm Deborah Ocker, the AGM of Finance and Management Services, and we have with us today our General Manager, Sabrina Landreth, Deputy General Manager, Ana Alvarez, also some members of the finance staff is Assistant Finance Officer Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer Michelle Strawson O'Hara. We also have David Sumner will be presenting today, Christina Crosby, our Budget Manager, and many other of our finance managers. We have AGM's O'Connor with us today, and definitely other members of staff, including members of ASD, and Chief Chiaburo is here. I think I got many of them, but I'm sure we will be introducing others later. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I am wondering, because Director Corbett may need to leave a little early, if we should begin with item 2, on which you've requested a recommendation. Would that be possible?
Sure, but I think we can get through. Yes, we can absolutely do that, Director Lane, if you'd like to start with item 2.
Okay, because we have staff here for that. All right, let's begin with 2, please.
Great, great.
And that's an update on the 2022 project budget, review and approve some proposed names and descriptions and scope.
Yes, and I will start by saying today, us not being able to provide programs or charge fees during the pandemic, so we adjusted our revenue. We weren't certain where the property tax was going to be going. And then, of course, as we came into December and January, we had more information available. But as a result, when we did put together last year's budget, we were, we held off on adding new staff, and we were conservative on focusing on the things that were really important. And so again, in this budget, we have some of those core things that are core to our mission at the Park District, and meeting the needs of our park visitors is one of the key things that you'll see in this in these budget requests. Community outreach and developing equity framework, forward-thinking strategic planning, operational funding for opening of new parks that we can talk about, and then just continuing our internal work on updating policies and procedures and employee safety and technology. So those are some of the highlights. But I will turn it over to Deb right now and let her walk us through the details. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deb Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer. Can you guys see my screen share? All right. So I'm going to present to you our preliminary 2022 general fund budget. And before I get into it, I want to give a shout out to Christina Crosby and Tao Wong Sepan, who you just met, who've been working behind the scenes to pull everything together. So this is a preliminary look just at our general fund budget, and we'll be bringing the whole budget to you in November, the November Finance Committee. So I will start, I can advance my slide here, with reminding you of our budget process. So we began back in March and April. If you remember, we were doing our board workshops on Zoom. We even did some cool Zoom voting features to try to get your priorities figured out for what was important to the board of directors. We took that information we got from the board workshops and used that as we were prioritizing budget requests later on in the year. Then during the summer, we began working on our position budgeting, and that's where we take all of our existing FTEs and we build in known increases for cost of living, any benefit rate changes, and we figure out what those costs are so that in August we can have our preliminary budget ready and we know what our expenses are going to be for the coming year. And then we start working on figuring out what our revenues will be, so that by September, when we start getting our budget requests, we are prioritizing them based on how much new money we have available to put towards these budget requests. And then here we are in October, we're bringing this to the Finance Committee, just the general fund for your review. And then in November and December, the full budget will be presented to the board and to the public. As we create our budget, we look at these budget balancing principles. And I'll sort of read these to you. I hope it's not too painful. We really want to create a financially stable organization. That's our first priority. So as we're making these decisions in the budget process, we're looking towards our long-term goals and long-term financial picture. We want to address legal and regulatory mandates right off the bat. So those are always our first things that we're going to be funding. We also might look out and say that we want to leverage our resources for capital projects and operations. So for example, there might be some grants out on the horizon that we know about at the state or the federal level, and we know that we have to provide matching funds. We might prioritize certain projects based on needing to leverage our resources with other money we can get from the outside. We're always looking to pursue restoration and preservation of natural and cultural resources while responding to a changing climate, so that we're incorporating that into our project planning. We are maintaining our parks and facilities in an environmentally sustainable manner. And last but not least, protecting and investing in our employees' well-being, professional development, and future retirement. And now we'll dive into our general fund budget highlights. So you will be seeing in the proposed budget new staff resources for vegetation and fuels management, and that's both in the fire department and in the stewardship department, and that's to continue implementing the wildfire hazard reduction and resource management plan. You'll also see new positions for parklands that are opening in 2022, which includes East Shore State Park's Brickyard Cove. At Sibley, you've got the Western Hills open space coming online and a new staging area at Pleasanton Ridge. You will also see funding for district-wide strategic planning and funding to create an information technology long-term plan.
So is the Western Hills open space, does that include McCosker?
I see
That
Deborah.
access?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then we will be enhancing capacity in the finance department, legal department, risk department, and human resources departments to respond to increasing workloads and regulatory requirements. We are also adding resources to park operations department, and that is to address the increasing number of visitors that we saw during the pandemic and continuing on today, and ensure that our parklands and trails and facilities are maintained safely. We are adding a new Del Val interpretive sector, and that will allow us to expand programming at the Del Val Visitor Center, as well as at Brushy Peak, Round Valley, Morgan Territory, and Vasco Hills and Vasco Caves. We're adding a new swing shift at the Tilden Equipment Shop, and that'll allow them to service vehicles more efficiently and effectively, and adding a new district-wide trails crew that's using Park District staff, as well as continuing that Student Conservation Association small trails crew that we've been using for the last several years. Now taking a step back and looking at the big picture of Park District revenues. So this pie chart is really just helping to give the perspective of our revenue sources. So you can see property taxes are the vast majority of our revenue, 92%, and it's held steady around 90, 91, 92% for as long as I can remember. And then the next biggest source of revenues is charges for services, which we are happy to be returning back to more normal levels. And we have some more slides that I will get into this. So total general fund revenues, 189.6 million in 2022. So here's some more details so you can see what's changed from the prior year, and 7% increase in our property tax revenue, a big jump in charges for services. And I will get into this in more detail on the following slides. So the property tax increase is $11.2 million, and we have the known increases from the two counties, Alameda and Contra Costa counties, for the first half of the year. And we combine that with the projection that we received from our consultant Beacon Economics to get a projection for all of 2022. And that gave us an $11.2 million property tax increase. We are also returning our fees and charges back to 2019 levels. We're very happy about that. Tiffany and the business services group did a careful drill down. And the one area that we're not quite getting back to 2019 levels is, for example, at Roberts Pool, where that pool will be closed down for a major renovation. But almost everywhere else is getting back to 2019 levels. This year, for the first time, you're seeing a $2 million transfer in from the district's pension trust. And this is something that we've been planning to do this whole time. We've been putting the funds in for several years, and now we're beginning to draw down on those funds, and we'll be drawing down on them for the next several years, beginning with this year. We also had a $300,000 increase from the Bay Area Transit Authority, and that is for bridge yard operations. And the one area where we saw a decrease was in investment earnings, and that's due to an extremely low interest rate environment that will limit our earnings and investments. Now moving over to the big picture on our expenditures, we have, again, a total $189.2 million on the expenditure side. And about 2/3 of that is personnel costs, which is, again, pretty normal for an agency of our size and has been pretty consistent over the last few years. And then this chart gives you a comparison of our 2021 general fund adopted budget, so you can see what's changed from the prior year. And the biggest dollar-wise increase, the biggest is in personnel costs, and talk more about that on another slide, and another big increase in intra-district charges. So diving into that a little bit more deeply, that percentage increase in personnel costs does include new staffing, as well as a 3% wage increase for all employee groups. But one thing we've implemented for the first time here is a vacancy rate. So we're doing a 4% vacancy rate. Essentially, we're funding our staff at 96% of the total cost, whereas in prior years, we've always fully funded them 100%. And this is really a best practice that more accurately represents the reality that we're not able to keep all of these positions filled. So in the past, when we've had these vacant positions, but we've fully funded them, at the end of the year, we end up with salary savings, and then we have a mid-year process where we are allocating those funds. So by having this vacancy rate in here up front allows the budget process to really happen all at once rather than doing the majority of it now, but then we do sort of like a mini budget process at mid-year after the year is closed. So this is the first year we're doing it. We are trying to be very transparent about it. And ideally, at the end of 2022, when we close the year, we shouldn't have a lot of money left over and have the big mid-year process that we've had in the past. And that brings me down to the final bullet point on this page, so I'll skip to that. Because we're implementing this vacancy rate, we're able to do something during this budget process that we previously would have done in the mid-year, which is allocate funding towards our major infrastructure renovation and replacement fund, the MER. And so we have a policy that recommends that we fund that between $9 to $11 million every year. Previously, we've been putting about $6 million in the budget process and then $3 million at mid-year. And so we are now able to do the full funding as part of the budget process. And now jumping back up to the, oh, Deborah, did you want to say something? No, okay. Jumping back up, so 4% increase in supplies this year, a 4.3% increase in services, and approximately $1 million for new equipment. And here's another big reason that you're seeing those personnel costs increase. We are proposing 36.8 FTE in this budget. That's all funds, not just the general fund. And looking back at 2021, you can see what Deborah was talking about earlier, that we were really pretty careful during our 2021 budget process based on the information we had at that time. We took a big step back in the number of new positions that we were funding, just in order to be careful. And so we're to some degree catching up with what we weren't able to do last year, and trying.
Hey, Deb.
Oh yeah.
Your slide didn't advance.
Oh, so sorry.
That's okay. Well, there you go. There. So there we're talking about the history of positions.
Thank you. All right. Should I repeat any of that, or is that?
No, you can just restate that, you know.
Yeah, so we are adding staff in order to keep up with the need. We're adding new parklands every year, opening up new facilities every year, and we're seeing this increased visitors to our parks. So this is an attempt to meet that need. We are also continuing our contributions to district-wide initiatives, and so these are things you've seen in prior year budgets. So we're continuing to fund, for example, vegetation and fuels management with a $1.2 million appropriation. Also environmental remediation, that's $1 million. That's for the Chabot Gun Club. $500,000 for land acquisition, setting aside funds from our general fund for possible land acquisition. We're putting aside $1 million into our pension trust to pay down that long-term liability. And we are putting $3 million into district-wide paving. Here are some base budget additions. So these are items we're funding not just for this year, but they're going to get added into the base budget so that in future years, they will also have this money. $100,000 for endangered species management, $60,000 for water quality alum treatment at Lake Temescal and Lake Gansa. We are adding to the base budget the Student Conservation Association Small Trails Crew. And we are putting funds in for technology, so backup capability and software and security. And we're appropriating funds for one-time projects. And these are for items that are to achieve certain programmatic needs or to achieve a vision. And so $200,000 is for district-wide strategic planning. We are setting aside $150,000 for an equity framework, $100,000 into our hazardous tree removal project. We will be allocating $150,000 for community outreach services, $100,000 for Kaiser baseline medical exams, $100,000 for pilot trail feasibility, and $120,000 for the Del Valle Visitor Center kiosk, and $100,000 for the Borel Agricultural Park preliminary planning. And this is, I believe, close to the last slide. It's a table that was in the packet where we are putting together the revenues and the expenditures so that you can see we do have a balanced budget. Again, this is just the general fund. And another caveat, we are still working on this budget. There will likely be items that we will have to rebalance or tweak. So don't memorize any of these numbers. They may change, but it's hopefully very close to what will be in the budget we present to you in November. And the next steps in this budget process. So you can look forward to that Thanksgiving week. We should be delivering you your proposed budget book. The week of November 29th, we'll be presenting the budget to all staff. On Monday, November 29th, we'll be bringing the proposed budget to the Finance Committee, and then in the evening, bringing it to the Park Advisory Committee. Then December 7th, we have the first public hearing at 6 p.m. with the Board of Directors, and then the adoption of the budget will happen on December 21st. And that concludes the presentation, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, I wonder if you would go a couple slides back to the chart. You know, the proposed, but that one, yes. And just go over those 5 items where the percentage of change is over 25%.
Sure. So just starting from the top. So our property tax increases 7%. So that's $11.2 million. That's our the big driver of our revenues. And
No, for my purposes, just do the 25% change. You don't have to go through all of them.
oh, so sorry. Okay, so charges for services. We are increasing 26.8% there. And that is bringing us back up to the 2019 fees and charges level. So 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. We believe we'll be able to bring all of our services back to the way they were, with a few exceptions. The 88% increase in interagency agreements is that BATA, Bay Area Transit Authority. They're providing us with funding for the bridge yard. And the 33,333% increase.
Very impressive. Yeah.
Is that is our pension trust. And so we are drawing down on that for the first time. So we're showing that to you here as a transfer in from a separate revenue source. So that's that increase.
Okay.
Jumping down on the expenditure side, we have a 37% decrease in equipment. And that is in last year's budget and in the 2020 budget. We were putting a lot of money towards new equipment for the phase out of glyphosate. And we have now allocated sufficient funding for that equipment. So this year, the equipment requests are really just for operations, for providing vehicles for staff. And not any of that big heavy equipment like we were putting in money for mowers and tractors in previous years. Jumping down to intra-district charges, that increase is the $3 million is for the MER fund, that major infrastructure renovation and replacement fund. So I was mentioning how we used to put the $3 million in during the mid-year process. And this year we are able to fund it upfront during this budget process. And then an additional $750,000 is to rebalance our other internal service funds. So that includes our major equipment fund. So as we bought some of this major equipment in the past, we now have to set funds aside to maintain it and to replace it in the future. And then also our risk and liability fund, we are increasing funding there due to some increased insurance costs. So you'll be able to see that more clearly when we bring the full budget to you. We're only showing you the general fund side here, but you'll also see some increased expenditures in those internal service funds when we bring you the full budget in November. It's kind of like you're only seeing half of the puzzle. And then transfers out increased. We have a number of projects that we are funding with transfers out, which we did list out in some of the other slides. So for example, the, well, let's see, district paving, pension, paying for our pension liabilities, land acquisition, those are in the transfers out. So that's money that's going into a different fund. Again, you're kind of only seeing half of the picture here. You're seeing the money going out from the general fund, but you're not seeing exactly where it's going into these other funds.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. I just thought I'd bring that up since I remembered where the slide was. Okay, so let's bring this to the committee with any kind of comments or questions that the committee has. Yeah, Ellen?
Yeah, thank you very much for the overview, and we'll be looking forward to the other additional information we'll get when we get closer to adopting the budget, but especially appreciative of the fact that, we're dealing with addressing issues that are new thanks to the additional usage of our parks during COVID and those needs, some of the environmental issues, and of course, making sure that's all part of how we make our decisions for budget. So thank you for all that sensitivity, and thanks for being on top of all of that. Very much appreciated. Looks good.
Okay, Elizabeth, do you have anything in particular you'd like to address?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I really appreciate all the thought and attention that has gone into the budget. I'm glad to see the vacancy rate included this time. I think that really helps with overall budget planning, and based on historical performance, 4% seems like a good conservative number. So I feel good about that. Good to see the new staff resources. There's a lot of new positions on that chart, so that's good to see, and particularly happy about the additional resources for vegetation fuels management, such a critical concern across the district. So thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. I look forward to seeing the details in the packet soon. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was reading through this a little late, and I sent some a list of questions. So do you want to just direct the answers for that, Deborah?
Yes, Director
Okay,
Lane, we can help walk through some of those. I first wanted to make sure that I didn't give the wrong answer to one of your questions during the presentation. And as you went through the presentation, you can see that we are implementing new strategies and some new best practices, and that's really the message we wanted to share with you. And then with the maintaining our facilities and our infrastructure, really shifting that to part of the adopted budget process. And as Deb said, you'll see when we present where we're using that money, you'll see where we're working on residences, we're putting money aside for the Point Pinole service yard, so it will be fully funded, and lots of other infrastructure type projects. So that will come to you in the next listing. But you had mentioned the opening of the Western Hills open space, and I wanted to give someone from ASD, either Brian Holt or Matt Grau, the opportunity to give you the right timing of what will be opening and when. Looks like Brian's popped up.
Well, I wish I was better prepared for that question. So I will have to get some information back for you from staff on when the Western Hills open space is scheduled to come over. I know there's been lots of conversations with the city of Orinda and the project developer about just wrapping up the conservation easement, and there's been some trails questions and staging area questions. So I will get that information for you and get it back to you as soon as possible.
But that is, Brian, that's separate from opening of McCosker. So even though they're
Correct.
attached to Sibley, the Western Hills open space is to the north, and it's kind of on a separate path than the McCosker project.
Correct. McCosker opening is largely driven by construction, and I see Lisa Gorgian popped up, and she can provide an update on that. And Western Hills open space is more related to wrapping up the conservation easement and the negotiations with the city and the developer.
Okay, thank you.
And Lisa Gorgian, did you want to give a little bit added to that or not?
Well, I would just say that, we continue to work on McCosker. We've had over 15 red flag days, no work days, and now it's actually raining. We're looking at probably next year to open. So,
Okay, but by next year, that's 2022, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Great, great. So there were a couple of questions that were related to the operations division. And so I might call upon AGM O'Connor, and he was also going to clarify the BATA revenue for me, that revenue is really not for the bridge yard facility, but it's for the pier, right? Is that correct, Jim?
Right.
Thank
Good
you.
afternoon, committee members. Jim O'Connor, Assistant General Manager of Operations. Glad to join you on a rainy Friday. Been waiting to say that for a while. Just want to clarify one thing on the additional funding that we're getting from the Bay Area Toll Authority, the BATA funding. That funding is related to the completion and the opening of the park, the new facilities, both the observation pier, that beautiful observation pier, and the new parking lot, which is the trailhead parking lot for the Zuckerman Trail across the bridge. So that funding was additional funding in addition to the funding we already are receiving from BATA for maintenance and operations of the bridge yard facility. So I just wanted to point that out because that's the ongoing partnership we have with BATA to support the Sutter Shoreline Park. So I just want to make sure I pointed that out to everybody. That's a great thing, and they're continuing to support us.
And so, is this about the figure we're looking at every year then?
Director Lane, can you repeat the question, please?
Is that about the figure we're looking at every year? Or
right, I believe it's for 5 years initial in our first agreement. So I believe that's for 5 years, 150,000 for support for the parking lot and for the pier is my understanding of that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, can you ask and answer a few other questions that came up related to the budget?
Sure. And Director Lane, I believe most of these were your questions. Did you want to ask the questions or do you want to just go through them?
Just go through them.
Okay. So your first question was related to the creation of the new Del Val Visitor Center interpretive sector. And the question you're asking, which is, how come we decided to include Morgan Territory, Round Valley, and Vasco Caves as part of the area of responsibility for the new interpretive sector? It's a good question. Same question I asked Ira Bletz, our regional manager. A lot of it's related to shifting workload and changing capacity. So we've been very successful since we opened up Big Break Visitor Center in 2012. It's been very strong response from the local schools, and they've continued to add in programming at Big Break. Ira's thinking around this, and none of this is set in stone yet, but is that we would take some of the load off of the naturalist at Big Break and pass it over to the new sector over at Del Val. Now, obviously, things will continue to change once we start to get more active at Thurgood Marshall. That'll take up a lot of time for the Black Diamond interpretive group, and we'll probably do a shift again at that time. So this is just in response to changing activity and new parks coming online. So this will change as we go through the years ahead. Hopefully that'll answer your question.
So if somebody is certainly part of the programs, this is essentially helping to lighten the load at Big Break. Is that right?
That's correct, Director Lane. And
they wouldn't necessarily have to go report to Del Valle and then come to Round Valley. I was just looking at the physical distance.
Oh, are you talking about for visitors to, yeah, no, mostly when we do programming in those parks, we meet out on site. So that wouldn't change anyway.
Thank you.
Sure. The next question you had in regards to our increased funding for hazardous trees. I think all of you know the situation we're in with trees district-wide due to climate change and the ongoing drought. Is you asked if if we have to get permits for our hazardous tree removals, and the answer is no. We do not seek permits from local agencies for hazardous tree removals in district parklands. We haven't done that, it hasn't been practice, and we haven't been doing that.
Okay, because, we just got this pretty complete letter from the Spring Hill homeowners, and it's outside of our, FEMA WOMF area. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just for point of clarification, that the fuels program is different than the hazardous trees program. The hazardous tree program is related to trees that we've evaluated and have a potential for failure in areas where they have a potential to impact public safety. So these are around our developed areas. So that's our hazardous tree program, and that's different than our fuels program, which of course has some stricter regulatory and permitting and oversight requirements.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. And then the last question is regarding I believe this question might be actually related to a future item on the audit.
That's true.
Maybe we'll wait for that question when we get to the audit.
That
review.
sounds great, Jim. Thank you very much, Jim.
You bet.
I think I'll talk a little bit about public safety, and there was a question for a little more information on the vegetation and fuels management requests. And so we are expanding the fuels crew to a total of 12 members, and I see that Chief Chiaburo is here to answer some questions. But also, as part of those additional resources, we're adding an additional fuels reduction coordinator and an additional resources in the stewardship department in order to manage the permitting and the biological monitoring side of that. But also within public safety, there are some, maintenance upgrades to different communications equipment and things like that. So there was a question maybe about the air support unit and some of the funding towards that, or some communications that either Chief or Captain Love would like to just expand upon.
Well, good afternoon, Anthony Chabreau, your AGM of Public Safety and Chief of Police. Good afternoon, committee members, board of directors, colleagues, and community members. AGM Ocker did alert me to a few questions regarding the air support. One of the questions I saw on my screen was, where would the unit reside? And if that has to do to their hangar, then they are currently based in Hayward, and I believe there's 3 to 4 years left on that lease. And at that time we would reassess. And I am asking the board if that was the question regarding their physical location, which airport?
Yeah, I was wondering about the physical location.
Yes, it's Hayward. Now, from time to time, we do consider Livermore, and that has to do with cloud cover. There are times when we have fog in Hayward, and that prevents us from taking off and operating. So Livermore is a location that has better weather, and that would be a more longer term goal as we continue to move through the lease. My understanding is we're about halfway through our lease right now at Hayward.
Okay, and thank you.
You're welcome.
Another question had to do with cultural resources, and I think I think Brian Holt will be able to respond to. There is some enhanced resources there.
Yeah, sorry, Brian Holt, Chief of Planning, Trails, and GIS. So the request for cultural resources was to enhance some of our cultural resource monitoring, particularly regarding some of the routine maintenance projects, the fuel removal projects, and ensure we have resources available to bring out tribal monitors as we're doing some of these sorts of things. So as you know, Director Lane, as you know, the cultural resource staff at the Park District is limited to specifically to our cultural services coordinator and the planning department. So Ana Marie Guerrero identified a need to bring in some outside resources to just assist with some of these ongoing projects as routine maintenance projects are going forward. So we have somebody doing that, doing the same level of cultural resource monitoring that our natural resources are.
Okay, so that's some funding really for consultants and other assistants.
Yeah, at this time, and we
Okay.
continue to, evaluate the program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. And then we also had, let's see, some questions about our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I believe Dr. Ana Alvarez is going to expand on that.
Yes, thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon, everyone. Deputy General Manager, Dr. Ana Alvarez. And I also love the rain, Jim. So it's a beautiful day to be here with all of you. And Director Lane, to answer your questions regarding the Park District's endeavor to address diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're very excited that the proposed 2022 budget does give us an opportunity to start implementing some of the recommendations from the work that was done in 2021, primarily with our public affairs and government affairs divisions. If you recall, we were able to get some work done by the UC Davis Center for Regional Change, as well as we embarked on an inclusive community engagement roadmap project. So that's very exciting, and we're hoping that we can start implementing those recommendations. And in regards to the other endeavor that the Park District embarked on, to look internally within the organization, if you recall, we engaged and we continue to be engaged in conducting a workplace assessment to understand our cultural belonging and to understand our how do we get to our overall goal by the board of directors through our master plan to have a diverse workforce. And that work was led primarily by me and human resources out of the general manager's office, and we're still working on that work. So what you see in 2022 will help us frame the additional steps to start implementing all those anticipated action plans and steps that we'll need to engage in to start implementing some of the strategies around that endeavor. So it does provide a framework, and it frames very nicely all these endeavors. Phase 2, I like to refer to it as phase 2, which is embarking on more deeply, I should say, on understanding diversity, equity, inclusion for service delivery, understanding the impacts in the decisions that we make as we endeavor to provide services and reach all of the communities of the East Bay in the San Francisco Bay Area. So that's mainly what the appropriations that you see there, the recommended appropriations that you see there, that's what they're intended to reach.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think one of the last big questions is Deb had put up the slide showing that we are proposing a good amount of new staff. And you could see from that chart, and what we talked about is that last year we really held off and we purposely did not add very many additional staff members because of all the uncertainty. So this year we're getting caught up. We are addressing some of the needs that we have with our park users, with our internal services that we're providing. And so yes, there are additional resources in the field and on the administration side. And Ana, did you want to expand on that at all?
Yes, thank you, Deborah. So the proposed budget does include all the elements that Deborah just briefly went through, and it's basically about being able to maintain our public commitments, and most importantly, being able to figure out the best way in which we can continue delivering services. So the increases in personnel, or what traditionally we like to call them here at the Park District, the growth of FTE, it's really about enhancing our resources and service delivery, being able to deliver on those commitments. One of your questions, Director Lane, that I saw in the email was where out of the 36.8 positions, where are they being allocated? And I'm very pleased to to share with you that in this, as we're shaping the budget, because again, this is a preliminary first review of what we're proposing, you will find that we're looking primarily as what I call the first phase of right-sizing operations, so that we can have safe and well-maintained parks to deliver to the public, since we saw an increase of park visitors in 2020. So about 63% or 23 positions of the 36.8 are primarily going out to support the parks out in the front lines. So that's a tremendous investment and commitment that we're making in response to the public and the board's interest. Then the next area where we're placing the greatest investment is in public safety. So 19% of these positions will go to support different types of services in public safety, which is about 7 positions. And what will be important to understand, and I just wanted to give you one more way of understanding the investment in personnel costs, or adding or enhancing personnel at the Park District, is that about, we'll say 29 of these positions are all positions that are frontline people, that positions that are represented either by the Police Association or by ASME Local 2428. And again, we're looking at right sizing, and we're looking at being able to sustain the infrastructure, the growth of the Park District, as I've spoken to before. And so now we're growing our human infrastructure to be able to continue delivering those commitments. And Director Lane, you'll be soon receiving your proposed 2022 budget book, and you will be able to get even more detailed information with the beautiful charts and illustrations that shows you the allocation by title of the position and where is this position being allocated, in what division and in what department. So it's coming to you.
Okay, good. You know, that is a early page that I turn to in the budget. So I appreciate a little preview. Thank you, Anna.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay, I think those were the majority of the questions that were brought forward ahead of time. But did that spur any other questions from any other board members?
Can you bring the personnel slide back up again? I may have a question on it. I just want to see it again to conform with the
bar slide.
The bar slide. The proposed position.
We will have Deb work on bringing that up again.
How's that?
Oh, there it is.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify, since the other slides are mostly talking about general fund, it looks like this is talking about general fund and other funds, because I noticed in the memo there was, I think, 32.3 from the general fund and then 4.5 from other.
That is correct, Director Eccles.
Okay.
This includes I think 4.5 positions that are funded outside of the general fund.
Great. Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure I was understanding it correctly. So thank you. That's all I had on that.
Okay. Great.
Okay, well, I thank you for very interesting review.
Thank you. Thank you. So that was an information item, so we do not need any action. So thank you very much. And thanks to all that helped answer all the questions.
Okay, I certainly appreciate that. Okay, so then we can move on to our next item, which is the 2021 Internal Audit Mid-Year Report.
And Madam Chair,
Yes.
I want to apologize, but I am going to have to step out of the meeting. But thank you very much, and see you soon.
Okay, I'm glad you're here for most of it. So
Yes, thank you all very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
okay, bye.
So I will introduce David Sumner, our Audit Manager, and he will present this item. David.
Good afternoon, David Sumner, Audit Manager, and I'm at your service. If you have any questions during the conversation, please let me know. I'll answer it right there as we progress. Let me share with you my screen. And okay. We, as internal audit unit, are two people. We are performing appraisal function. Basically, we match the theory of the things with the practice of activities that take place. And if there is any variances, then we explain that and try to find out what's the root cause and how it impacts the district and what should be done to make sure that activities match with the envisioned plan. We review financial statements, transactions, cash handling practices, district-funded grants, the concession agreements, and contracts. During the first half of the year, we completed 6 audit projects. We reviewed 412 contracts and RFPs. We prepared district's annual financial report to a state controller, which is a very lengthy report similar to the financial statement that district annually prepares for general public. Compiled a statistical section of the annual comprehensive financial report, which used to be called CAFR, and now it's called the ACFR, because evidently in South Africa, CAFR had a bad meaning and racial tone. Therefore, South African practitioners of financial reporting for government asked for, and the name has been changed to ACFR, which is Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. We review financial viability of the prospective concessionaires and vendors. And if you want to know how an audit goes through, basically in January every year, we prepare an annual plan, discuss it internally with the AGMs and general manager, get approval to go ahead with it. In that, we identify, after our plan is prepared, we identify a scope of each of these audits that we want to perform. They send a planning memo or an email or converse with the supervising staff and say what we are going to do and what we need. And then we perform the detailed audit work during the year or during the project time. And then after we have completed our field work, we prepare a discussion draft of the audit findings and recommendations and bring it to the attention of the people involved and request the management to provide a response. As I said, during the first half of the year, we prepared 6 audit reports that were issued. 3 of them were local WWE Grants, whereby district provides funding for projects that are undertaken by other entities that coincide with the objective of the district and is helpful for the public as far as part of the park and rec activity of each of these governmental entities that are receiving funding. And these were the 3 ones: Port Costa School, Fremont Warm Spring Recreation and Restroom, and Discovery Bay Tennis Court Conversion projects. Basically, we, as the district, provide the funding as they go through the process. They submit a reimbursement request on occasional basis. Each one of them goes through a review. And then at the end of the project, before they receive final reimbursement, internal audit goes through a detailed review of every activity that has taken place and makes sure that things can tie and everything is properly documented and all that. And then confirms payment of the last installment that the grantee has requested. Generally, there has not been much of a problem in these WW grants. In my memory, there has been only once or twice that we have had issues with the recipients, and they have conformed after we have brought the matters to their attention. For the main audits, these were the main audits that were performed. We performed a review of lost tram was stable. If you recall, concessionaire has changed since then. And the previous concessionaire was truly a public servant, if you will, with regard to the people skill and level of activity and help that they would provide to the boarders. But as far as the record keeping, they were inadequate. And certain things came up during the review that were brought up to the attention of the operations department revenue unit. And they promised that they will take care of it. Since then, concessionaire has changed and a new concessionaire is in place. We are thinking of doing another audit next year to make sure that the new concessionaire basically is on a good footing to begin with, and we would not be facing some of these issues that had happened in the past. Concessionaire used to spend part of their collections that were in cash form for the activities that they are doing. So what had happened was their monthly statements that were provided to the district were not matching with what they had deposited into the bank and what they had actually received. And then for the training services that their contractors provide, and the concessionaire was receiving 10% of their income, they had not retained records, and it was not really verifiable as such. Only I believe there was one or two during the January of a particular year that they had provided a roster of training classes that they had put for the public, and the concessionaire was basically relying on whatever the trainer would pay them. There were 4 boarding agreements missing, and without boarding agreements, we cannot be certain as to whether all the revenues that were collected were reported or not. So we insisted that they have to keep better boarding agreements. Also, it could expose the district to, or the concessionaire to a legal dispute if something happens. But if you have a boarding agreement, then it can be really decided upon and settled very fast. Then another issue that came up, it was financial department records were not quickly updated. 2-3 years before we do this audit, there was another concessionaire that was handling the lost tram post estate. They were forced out because they were non-compliant. And then we noted that financial records were not updated to reflect the name of the new concessionaire for roughly about 7 or 8 months. And it was after the close of the year. So we requested that that would be more timely. And the reason for that was finance department accounts receivable unit was not notified as to the change. And it was not having really a financial impact as such. It was just as a matter of records. And that has been taken care of. Diablo Foothills is an isolated place near Walnut Creek open space, and they run a swimming pool, and they have 4 or 5 reservable places. What had happened was district converted their cash collection and reporting procedure from the previous method to a point of sale system. And in 2018, revenue was reported through that system. In 2019, when we looked at, they had received swimming fees. They had deposited into the bank, but there was nothing in the point of sale system to show that, or ActiveNet to show that. And we realized after that, after discussion with the park supervisor, that he had decided on his own to use the previous system to prepare the financial information. And fortunately, it was very early in the year and it had no impact. And we notified finance department and also revenue unit. So immediately after that, Diablo Foothills was again back on the ActiveNet reporting system. Lastly, we did a review of MAST fleet management department. It's quite a large department with a significant activity and very helpful services that district needs on a regular basis. They maintain and perform preventive maintenance for the fleet of the district. They handle fuel purchases and dispensing. They do have a credit card that is used for the refueling only when a staff person has no access to a fuel dispensing facility within the district. Immediately they can use their fleet credit card and buy gas at a regular private gas station. And they had been partly audited with regard to fuel usage before. And this time we did a review of how they handle repairs and how they keep track of the equipment and the spare parts that they need to use. And we found a few issues with that. Vehicle and equipment repair and maintenance records were not really up to date, and they need to make a more concerted effort to take advantage of the existing system or the new computerized system that they would be acquiring later on to make sure that activities get posted. Controls over the parts and materials and tools needed an improvement. At the time that we visited the site, inventory was really accessible to all employees that are in location. There was no transactional recording of if a part comes in or goes out. And it was somewhat of an honor system, if you will. And I realized why it has happened like that, because as the district has expanded in its activity and the number of vehicles and equipment has increased, the priority of the mechanics and the workers at the site had changed from the record keeping and keeping things up to date to performing the activities that are needed to make sure that vehicles or equipment go back to service immediately. And there was some kind of a dislike of the existing computerized system that is there. And they had resorted to preparing a handwritten document instead of using the system that is really available. You know, when you take your car, say to a dealership, they bring in a tablet and they ask a few questions. They say what it is wrong, and they make a note of it, and the information gets transferred, and every piece of equipment and every minute of time that is spent on the vehicle is calculated for you, and you get a bill at the end and all that. In the district corporation yards, it was not like that. It is not, probably, at least at this point, not like that yet. And the people that turn in a vehicle for repair would indicate what they need, and some staff person or a mechanic that works there takes a note of it on a piece of paper, and then they go doing the thing that is needed, and then they are supposedly required to input that data into the computer system that they have, which does not happen on time. And when we looked at the items that were retained in the stockroom, their prices were not right, and not everything was really within the system. In other words, you know, we had to spend money acquiring a computerized system, but we were not using its capabilities for the intended purpose. So this is something that would have to be worked out when time allows us, and when there is adequate really training, staff training, and desire by the people that are responsible to maintain the record as such within the system. For the fuel dispensing, there are several locations that dispensation is controlled electronically, and things get automatically recorded. But there are sites, 8 or 9 sites probably, that they do not have electronic fuel dispensation equipment there. So they resort to maintaining a log at each site. And these are above the ground tanks that are 3, 4, 5,000 gallons at the most. And what happens is staff at the corporation yard are supposed to input these logs into the Square Rigger, which is the name of the software that is being used there. But unfortunately, due to the turnover in staffing and limited time, some of these logs have not been inputted. So basically, management is unaware and cannot make a decision whether equipment fuel is properly recorded or not. And that could open up the room for misuse of fuel. We do not have any notice of any misuse of the fuel, but safeguarding that is supposed to be there and functioning and alert the management did not exist because the logs were manual and they have not been inputted. So hopefully when they have adequate staffing, they will be able to update the records. Then fuel cards that are being used by certain staff are supposed to be reviewed by the fleet manager. And I had reviewed this in the past. There were adequate documentation to prove that he does a review. But this time when we went, there was really no record that they have been reviewed. He told me that he has reviewed them, but they have not retained any log or any documentation to prove it. And as auditor, you say, let me see what you have in this, and it did not exist. So that would be another thing that is need to be done. Then, as I said, we had audited this activity before, and we had made certain recommendations. 4 or 5 recommendations, and 3 of them were implemented, but another 3 were not implemented as yet. As I said, this is an information item only. When the new year comes, I will have a full detail of all the audits that have been performed, and I will be at your service if you have any question on that. Please.
Thank you, David. Great report. I will just highlight a couple of things. One is on the cash collection. We do have in our work plan to do, I think, 3 or 4 additional cash collection sites this year. With COVID, there wasn't as much cash collection, but we do go back a couple of years sometimes to do audits. And as a follow-up with cash collections, we certainly work with operations to make any recommendations. A lot of it has to do with training, and our finance department general ledger unit does a lot of training, hands-on training on cash collections as new supervisors are hired also. And then on the MAST item, I think David has had the opportunity to meet with MAST staff, and I think they might want to comment on some of the things that are put that were reported in the audit, but I'm not sure, Director Lane, if you'd like to see if there's any questions before you might call on the operations staff. Thank you.
Yes, I appreciate the presentation, even though some of it's really not very good news as far as I'm concerned. So Elizabeth, do you have any questions before we talk more about it?
Yeah, well, I am interested to hear from the MAST staff about some of these findings. I'm also just wanted to comment on the Las Trampas, even though we no longer have that concessionaire, I appreciate the recommendation that we should still, go and seek the money from the underreporting of the, so we should try to get the fees that are due. It's not a lot of money, but still just on principle. I think it's important to hold people accountable. So I appreciate the work there too. Yeah, that's about it.
Okay, thank you. I've these Las Trampas staples have been you know, I don't live that far from Las Trombas, and I've kind of watched over the stables, but tried not to get too involved. And I have to say that I'm not sure whether this is true with all of our stables, but I mean, there are just consistently issues of our concessionaires not taking our requests seriously. And I was really hopeful for this last one because evidently they had also managed another one of our stables, and we were optimistic. And so here again, I'm not sure how we can convey to some of our concessionaires how that we're serious about needing to have this reporting done. And I know it's tempting if you're dealing with cash to just deal with cash and not have that additional accounting aspect to it. So this is, I will say, this is definitely not the first time we've had these kinds of problems. And then on the others, you know, my question really had to do with training for people, because a lot of us start with paper, and that whole idea of learning some kind of a digital system sometimes is just not something people, I don't know, either want to do or can do. So I'd like some comments on that, because I know we get reports in and then we buy new systems and then they don't get used, and that's very discouraging. So that's all I'll say on that, and I'll let others from MAST or maybe Jim want to talk about it.
Sure, Director Lane. Just once again, Jim O'Connor, Assistant General Manager Operations. I've got with me Tiffany Margolisi, who's our Business Services Manager, who works with David on the audits of our cash handling systems out in the parks. And I've also got our Chief of Maintenance and Skilled Trades, our MAST unit is Robert Kennedy. He is here with us. And we've also got Jason McChrystal, our Fleet Manager, with us. So just a couple of words, and I'm going to probably hand it off to Tiffany and Robert. But, you know, we appreciate David's work in audit services. It keeps us up on our game, identifies issues that we may not be aware of in terms of best practices. I think it's, you know, sometimes it's painful, but it's important work, and it's important to get us, you know, refocused. And I think that when I look at the, Robert and I reviewed the MAST findings, and I think we've got a situation that we can readily rectify in the future, and I'll let Robert address that. I think the cash handling situation over at Diablo Foothills was just a simple mistake on the part of the park supervisor. I think we've corrected that as we are trying to increase our game here by adopting the point of sale systems district-wide as the technology outflows, meaning our ability to have connectivity into the network. That's improving every year. We've added more and more parks onto that system. And that's really Tiffany's staff working with Jim Tellerico's staff in IS and rolling out those Wi-Fi and other connectivity systems district-wide. So I think we've every year improved on that as we've added that new technology. So I think while it's painful to go through this process, I think we are working to correct that in the long term. So that's the last word I'll leave on that. And I don't think, Tiffany, I think we've answered the question in regards to the cash handling. I think that's been handled. And then I'll hand it off to Robert to talk about what our plans are in MAST to make some corrections in this area that we've identified in the audit.
Good afternoon, committee members. Robert Kennedy, Chief of MAST. I just want to give you an update. Since the audit, SquareWigger is the fleet management system that Fleet actually uses right now. There's always been a practice of ours to receive equipment in that has maintenance utilizing the driver's repair requisition forms, because we don't know what the piece of equipment needs as it's being brought in, because it's kind of just being brought to the shops blind. And so the mechanics jot down the work that is necessary for each of those pieces of equipment, and then they actually start to go to work. And so they also jot down all of the equipment and materials associated with those repairs. And then when they have completed that work, they go over to their computer-based systems, which is Square Rigger, to input all that information. And so this is a dated practice. It's something that does need to be updated. And just so you recall, back on January 19th, 2020, we secured funding for a new fleet management software. So we're in the process of evaluating new software for fleet management, which will give us the ability to have tablets on hand and also have a reporting system. So before district employees bring their equipment in, they can actually create a tag or a work order for our fleet management staff. So upon arrival, it's already updated into the tablet, and they can actually perform the work there. So there's not going to be a loss of information, and we'll be able to increase efficiencies, because right now, given the volume of work that the fleet staff have to handle and the limited number of staff that we do have, it makes more sense for them to be able to use this paper system and then transfer that system information into the computer, because their computers are in a separate office away from their bays, and they would have to, take all of their equipment off, go create a work order, input all the information, and then go back to their base to do the work. And you could just imagine, with the volume of piece of equipment coming in and out every day, that really slows them down and hampers their ability to work effectively. So we are looking at making those improvements. With regards to our fuel system, the audit was actually completed prior to us finishing the upgrade to all of our systems. So back in 2019, Fuel Masters database was improved. So all of our locations are now digitized, and they are reporting electronically. So all of the transactions for all of our above ground fueling stations go directly into an electronic system. As a reference to the WEX cards transactions, we were in the middle of a transition, so that's why some of the information was not updated. Things have since been updated, and we have not had a result of any kind of fraudulent use of the cards by our staff. We were able to actually find out that there was fraudulent use because of a skimming transaction that was happening at one of the facilities out in Antioch. And we have since told staff not to use those facilities and go to another remote location. But the software and the equipment that we do have in place and our methods are picking up issues that transpire. And so we do have a system in place. It is taking some time to get updated, but we're going to get there.
And I also wanted to add it in that, and I think we're almost done with this. We are automating. David had alluded to the fact that we had a paper system at several of our district fueling sites. And I believe that we're almost completely fully automated at this point. Maybe I don't see Jason's face on here, but I believe we're almost fully automated at this point, which will eliminate that. Again, just like the issue with the work orders, when you have a two-step process like that, where somebody's filling out paper and then somebody has to do a data input into a system, that two-step process is really inefficient. What happens is people don't do the data input, and those paper forms fill up, and then it gets overwhelming. So Jason, are we almost done with our automation of the fueling sites?
Good afternoon, members of the committee, members of the board. To answer your question, Jim, yes, we are fully automated within Fuel Master for all of our district fueling sites.
Great, yeah, so that'll help with, again, better record keeping on our fuel usage at our district sites. So I think we've got a plan to correct everything that's been identified in the audit going forward, eliminating that two-step process. The other thing I want to point out to the committee members is that in the proposed 2022 budget, we're also proposing to add an additional shift to the fleet mechanics at Tilden. This will greatly help with our throughput of maintenance work and hopefully some of this paper keeping process too. So that's part of our 22 budget proposal. It'll be coming to you later in November and for approval in December. So that'll help out. We've really added a significant amount of equipment in operations, especially, and that's been challenging to keep up with the maintenance on repairs of that equipment. So I think we've got a good plan for the future, and that's really what the best outcome we can get from an audit is to have a good plan about how to make things better. So I think we're on our way.
Okay, well, I really appreciate hearing from each of you about that. And I can see how writing things on paper and then getting them into the computer is like double work. Is the staff there comfortable with tablets? You know, some of these are like new things to people.
Jason, you want to tackle that question?
Sure will. Director Lane, to answer your question, yes, staff is fully comfortable with that. We've had quite a turnover in staff, and everyone is actually requesting it because of the efficiencies of the system. They would like to have access to it at their workstations because for them it's cumbersome to travel back and forth to the office space where the desktops are at. And at Tilden, it's actually upstairs in a mezzanine area. So it's much more difficult.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, as we add more equipment all the time in the last couple of years, it's been really impressive. We do need to move to being as efficient as we can and making sure people are following the procedures. So I'm glad to hear what you're doing to make it work, you know, more efficiently. And I guess what I'm wondering is, so when you have a report like this from the internal audit and people are responding and fixing things, then at what point does that response come to the finance committee so that they can feel assured that the response is going on?
David, did you want to answer that?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Usually we have a 1 month interval between when the discussion draft is presented up until they decide to respond. And within a month after that, they usually have a response. So the audit report format is still in the discussion draft format, and the staff have not had time to respond to it. But when they provide the response, then I'll prepare a final version with the management response, and then I issue that report. And if it happens within the year, then it would come to you. If not, it will be in the next year's annual report, if you will. So generally, if something is incomplete, at the time of discussion draft, the board would be informed about it. And at the time that the report is completed and I have response, they will be informed again that process has been completed. They have provided their action plan.
Thank you, David. Yeah, so internal audit comes to this finance committee twice a year. And then also, as you noticed in the report, David reviewed past audits when he went back out to the fleet shop, right? And so that's another way of just double checking to see if things were implemented, even beyond this plan that we have in place. So those are the two ways that we circle back. I think we could use improvement on circling back with what the final outcomes are, certainly, but we do have these two methods of reporting out.
Okay, thank you. So, so Jim, do you have any suggestions on how this can go more smoothly?
In terms of the response to the audit process, is that what you're referring to?
Well, what about everything?
Well, you know, the whole scope of what we talked about today, like on the concessionaires, with every new concessionaire, there's an opportunity to do a better job. And I know Tiffany and her staff are working with our new concessionaires to ensure that we're getting proper record keeping. So that's always an opportunity when we have turnover. And I know, Director Lane, you've been on Board Ops Committee, and we talk about the process for selecting concessionaires, and my words of responsive and responsible. So we're always seeking to get those better concessionaires that are responsive to our concerns and responsible in terms of complying with their contract terms. So Tiffany and Renee Patterson manage most of that, and they do a great job at that. So I think things get better with each year. In terms of the mass side of things we've discussed today, like I said earlier, I think we're on the right track. We've got our new chief of mast. He's got a very strong background in managing equipment and those types of services. And of course, Jason's been here for a long, long time. And it was Jason's original recommendation to update the Square Rigger software. So I know he's on board with that. So I think we're on our way. I think we've got a good team in place, and we just need to get the time in to get the new software in place, and we'll be doing a better job real soon.
Okay, thank you.
And Director Lane, you mentioned training, and so that is a big part of what we on the finance side try to help with. And they did implement a new supervisors training academy recently, and so we do have finance staff presenting at that, and then we try to follow up in any areas where it's needed, where additional training can be helpful.
And the only other thing I would say, Director Lane, is I wanted to mention in terms of the company, your original question was about the complication of the process and the use of the tablets. But one thing you have to keep in mind is that today's vehicles are very computerized, very electronic focused. And so if you walk into any one of our shops today, they're using quite a bit of equipment that's digitized. And they're evaluating digital information out of vehicles. So that's pretty common for our mechanics to be managed in those types of systems. So it shouldn't be a problem.
All right, that's good to hear. I like my yellow tablet myself. So Elizabeth, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it would be helpful to see, the written responses to David's report, and I know you all will do that, but it definitely sounds like you're on the right track in terms of a plan. But I'd be interested to see the report on the mass recommendations, but the others as well. So I hope that will all be included in the final report. I assume it will be. And then, in terms of the technology, I'm glad to hear that the technology is becoming more and more pervasive out there in the field. But to the extent that tablets are needed for folks to be able to do their jobs more efficiently, that's certainly something I would support. Tablets are pretty inexpensive at this point, and if we can, really reduce and get rid of paper tracking, I think that would be well worth the investment from my perspective.
Okay. All right. Thank you again. This is my report that I use. So, but I don't have those major responsibilities of keeping track of all of this equipment either. So, all right. Thank you very much, David, for your report and for everyone's response to us. I think we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to serve. And, internal audit work is really just to serve the user groups and departments to be informed. And I do the monitoring on behalf of the management, and I'm sure that it's beneficial for them. So I appreciate that opportunity that is given to me and the staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So is there anything else on this that people would like to volunteer at this time? Caitlin, did we have a public?
Chair Lane, we have no public comments.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. So no public comments, then we're going to move to committee comments. Any committee comments?
Nothing further from me.
No, I've pretty much commented. All right, and so our next meeting we have at a little different date, and
Right.
that is going to be Monday, November 29th.
That's
We
correct.
talked, yeah, we talked about a change in it at the last meeting.
Mhm.
And so this is a meeting everybody knows about, and it's on our agenda.
Yes. So we'll be having that around the noon hour, and the goal is likely to have that one in the boardroom.
Yes. All right.
We'll see how it plays out, but that would be our goal.
We'll see how it works. And we will, according to your calendar, we'll get our draft budget document like a week before or so.
At least a week before that, correct.
Before. Okay, that will be much appreciated.
Okay.
Okay, so anything else, Deborah? Or,
No, thank you.
Deborah, or okay.
I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Then we are adjourned.
Thank you, Director Lane. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for being there today.